There you go.
We are technologists.
Can the folks in Zoom hear us now?
Awesome.
Yay.
All right, so I was just saying, this is your chance to ask a question live of Jonathan, especially for those of you who are remote. So feel free to jump in with any questions related to DocAssemble that are on your mind.
Or related to the presentations earlier today from these fine experts.
I know I'm on the panel, but I have a potential hot question of Jonathan. So DocAssemble's been like really successful for the past 5 or so years, and there was like, I know there was a series of large like companies like doing like serving at a big scale, like Upsolve and Documate, that were using DocAssemble like under the hood and sort of adding a lot of good features on that. But a few, like specifically those two companies I'm thinking of, Upsolve and Documate, have explicitly sort of like started moving away from DocAssemble. And I'm just kind of curious, as like the person who created it and continues to like put a lot of work and effort into it. Yeah, like what you think about it, if it's a thing you think that you like we could address, or yeah, I don't know.
Well, I never really intended the Documate community lawyer after pattern thing to happen. I think people just put a front end on top of it because they thought it was a convenient way to get up and running quickly by making a no-code platform. So I'm kind of glad that Documate and After Pattern went and built their own back end. I think that's great. I did kind of intend for companies like Upsolve to use DocAssemble, but the thing is, like, once you start really specializing in something, it helps if you have your own code base and you can have your own custom code base. So I think with Upsolve, it wasn't so much that they needed to spin up something quickly using an existing document assembly framework. Like, they had a very precise system that they wanted to follow and things that they wanted to integrate with. And so they built their own custom platform and that does all that. And also they had this very smart developer who basically invented like his own version of DocAssemble on the back end. And it wasn't even DocAssemble related, but it was like a Q&A system, JavaScript based. So that's one system that went their own way. But I would like to see more Upsolves in the world. Jonathan Petz is here. I think they're really the model of being able to deliver legal services at scale using a combination of technology and human review. So it's not just that they have a system that is totally a robot and leaves people on their own to make mistakes. They involve people at various points in customer success and in manual review of what's created. And I would love to see more systems like that in areas like family law. And that's why I built a number of features into DocAssemble to enable multi-user interviews. So if an advocate wanted to get involved in an interview, they could even do screen share with people. So those are features I definitely want to encourage, and I would like to see more people emulate the success of Jonathan Petz. So you can ask him about how you can create that. And when I talk to law students, I encourage them to become legal tech entrepreneurs and start Upsolve-like companies. But I do hope that like those developers who start those companies will enjoy Python and use DocAssemble. But we'll see. I can't predict who uses DocAssemble. It's been used by random people for things that I never thought anybody would use my code for. But that's what's nice about the international open source community, is that if people find it useful, they use it. Question in the room.
Question is, what's on tap as far as features or abilities that you have in mind for bringing on for DocAssemble in the short term or medium term future?
What features are in the works? It all depends on what people ask for in Slack. And sometimes I remember to write them down on my to-do list and then I try to implement them. I don't have any like grand master plan of additional features. I feel like I've added 80 gazillion already, and so many of them are things that you can do with APIs. The one sort of major infrastructure change that I would like to make, and that I've been talking to Michelle about, is changing the front end to be based on the system called React, so that it will be faster, and it'll do like show ifs in a more modern way. That's going to be a major change, and it could also break any customizations that people have that are JavaScript based. So it would be a difficult upgrade for a lot of people, but it would be good to move into the future and have a more responsive front end. So really, I would turn that question around to all of you, and especially the people who are remote, who are not asking questions in the chat, to identify what features you would like to see in the system. Jonathan.
Yeah, Quinn, this question is for you. So yesterday, your presentation on, it's called AI.
The Weaver?
The Weaver, yeah. So that was like it was really exciting thing to see in terms of like how far docassemble is extended. So I'm kind of curious, like what's your vision of where you think this product will be in 2030?
So the Weaver specifically, like that, I think that we're going to probably be moving more and more features into it that currently do need to be coded, but we want to be really careful to never cross over that line into generating unmaintainable code. So I know we can do some, like you asked yesterday about basic kind of logic, nested branching logic, both in and outside of the screen. That's something I think we can do safely. It's not really a hard way to do it, so that you can still edit the code just as well as you can now. So we're seeing more and more people being able to use the Weaver really easily, and they shouldn't, and that's maybe where they want to stay for a little bit more of the editing workflow than they do now, and that's something I'd like to see. Another feature that we're been working hard on implementing is more flexibility. So we kind of have a little bit of a modular system right now. If you upload a file that basically we have a hook for you to plug into the Weaver and make your own customizations to what it does. So right now you can change the output template. It's a YAML file. You know, it has some blocks that are built into it, like where it's including other files, where it's describing the metadata, the logo, all those things are there right now. And we've hard coded it to kind of this use case for court forms. That's kind of the thing that we needed to do rapidly. So that's a plugin thing you can do now. So you can replace that and have something that's better designed for a, maybe it's going to include a block where you're having a Stripe paywall, for example. That's something you could do right now. Some of the other features we wanted to modularize, we're going to take a little bit of more refactoring, like letting people add custom variables that they would like to have the Weaver handle. Should be really simple, but because of the way we designed it, it's a bit more of a larger refactoring lift than it needed to be probably. But that's coming because, you know, that's what's going to really keep it sustainable and usable for the long term. So customizability and adding more features to do more of the editing in that environment. That's kind of where I think we're going to start.
Do you feel ever commercialize the Weaver?
I don't think so. I mean, well, it will stay MIT licensed. That's kind of Suffolk's default. Yeah, I don't think that's something that is really in the roadmap, but maybe that will be a sustainability model for it later. Maybe Suffolk wouldn't want to maintain it forever, and that could change.
I have a question for the panel. Do you think that to develop really good legal guided interviews, we need lawyers to figure out how to be technologists, or do we need technologists to figure out how to think like lawyers? Or do we need well-functioning collaborators who communicate and the techies don't know about the law, or the legal people don't know about the technology? Like, how should that work ideally, and what's it like been your experience?
Well, I'll take that one because I've taught law students now, and some of the students come into my class with coding backgrounds. Some students come in with none at all. I think you need a multidisciplinary team, but I think So Nicole Braddock's gonna come into my class, and she said at a past LitCon, I guess it was 3 years ago, or maybe 4, that she did not think that lawyers needed to code, that she likes to hire people with engineering background, not a legal background. But I think she's underestimating the value that she brings to that team as a legal expert, because I find you really do need lawyers to be part of the team to understand and grasp people who have been trained in law. They don't have to be lawyers, but to be able to figure out how to craft a good interview that asks the legally correct questions and functions the way that you want it to function. That said, it's not always, I think people can learn, like my model is like, let's get 80% of the way with people who've learned something, a tool like docassemble, to get the basics done. And then have somebody on the team who can fill in the gap. I don't need to train people to code everything to be a helpful part of the team. I think it takes a few weeks of training. Lawyers can learn that if they're interested. And then they'll have that legal training that can take a lot more time to do. But you need someone there who can do the rest. I find myself being that on a lot of teams, especially when I'm doing consulting work, because I've found it much easier to hire consultants who work with me that have the legal background and a little bit of docassemble knowledge. And I think my team would benefit from having more technical people who have the computer science background from the beginning, and like some of the wonderful design and CSS skills that we saw Chris demonstrate earlier. But to get the functions of your interview, I think lawyers have a secret advantage. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, from what I've seen, you can't have lawyers and coders in these separate groups because the development cycle is very slow. You know, someone says this question doesn't sound quite right, edit the wording. I mean, the cycle is just right. The coder goes and changes it, but they didn't understand because the description wasn't specific enough. So there's a few things there. One is, which I'm kind of excited about, all the law students that are coming through. I know they're not all going to become docassemble developers, but they at least start understanding what the coding side is like, so that when they have requests, they know how to make them, they know how to communicate about code, and they know what is going into coding. So I really think it's important to have both sides exposed to the other's world. And to have people who are willing to, you know, step outside their space. I don't think it's necessary to have a lawyer who's a coder at the same time. I think, and I mean, it can't be, because it's not possible for that to exist on every team, organization, or project. But I think as a coder, I haven't needed to know that much of the law to get a handle on what lawyers are asking for and what lawyers are asking about. So yes, definitely interdisciplinary, definitely possible, and definitely need a lot of communication. But I think there's balance that you can find there.
The only thing that I would add to this whole discussion is framing it less about like lawyers on one side and coders on the other side, and more of like subject matter experts, which can mean a lot of different things. It can mean lawyers, it can mean like UX experts. For everyone who was here yesterday, I feel like every single presentation yesterday mentioned like the importance of UX. So I hope that got hammered home. And I think that's the more important thing, because without that, you don't actually have, like, you could have a lawyer draft the most legally correct interview, but like if no one uses it, it doesn't really have any effect. And that being said, I still sort of agree with a lot of what like Quentin and what Michelle have said, specifically about that. I think that like you need the two groups to work together. I think you can get away with more teaching subject matter experts enough coding to be productive. And then like I view my position as a developer as like amplifying everything they do and making it much easier to do it. And if I have to keep coming in and like doing stuff and tweaking little things, I am not doing my job correctly as a developer. So.
And the fact that docassemble offers, separates concerns so well that non-hardcore coders can come in and they can change language and they can change. I mean, there's so much they can do in there, right? They like you said, they don't need a lot of coding, just the ability to get in there and play with the UX, with the specifics that they need to make the tool functional.
Oh, there was a question in the Zoom chat asking me what were some of the uses of docassemble that I found surprising. Early on, somebody in France used docassemble to diagnose problems with mechanical equipment. Somebody else was trying to use it to develop quotations for putting fencing around somebody's property and like develop invoices for doing those jobs. So, and I think do you remember?
There was
any?
like a dentist recently, I think, right?
I don't remember.
Yeah, lots of uses in the medical area, actually, surprisingly.
Yeah.
Lots of forms there, I guess. That's why. Yeah, there's some other good questions in the chat, but maybe another.
So I have a question for you. When you're talking about the two groups, your developers and your attorneys or your subject matter experts, when you're trying to find a solution, or you're trying to ideate like where a solution's possible, that there's a problem, and that something needs to be fixed, but I wonder, in that process of getting business requirements from each other, if you run into issues where the assumptions made on one side, like as an attorney, I might have assumptions about what developers can do, and I may be very wrong about those assumptions, right? Because I don't really truly understand like what the difference between a relational database is and a graph database. And if I understood that, then I might say, well, we should do this instead, right? Because this better fits with how I operate in my practice. But I don't have the I don't have the language or the understanding to get to that point. And so that it's a missed opportunity, right? In the same way, like I think one of the main problems developers have, they fail to understand, like, well, if the law is a wall, you can change it, right? That's what lawyers do, right? So we can change the policies of the court, change the process of the court, right? And so you run into these assumptions that are preventing you from having a better solution. So how do you avoid that? How do you, with not having somebody who's both?
Yeah, I think that's one of the advantages of having someone who's both. I mean, the challenge obviously is only so many people have interest in both of those areas. But I think you can solve some of those problems by making sure that everybody on your team is empowered to voice those kind of concerns. Like you described two situations where someone probably could speak up and say, hey, this is what I think would be better, before I just go off and blindly follow your instructions.
I guess my question is, like, what questions do you ask of the others if you don't know that you don't know that something else is possible? That makes sense.
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying. I mean, I would just encourage people to ask questions directly like that. Like, hey, here's what I think we're going to try to do. What do you think about this approach? Before starting a big project, always try to do a lot of user research to make sure that we're building the right thing. And you try to ask open-ended questions before you choose a solution. And I would say you could do that even inside a team for a feature. Like, do a little user discovery inside your team about what the needs are, and then have people propose solutions. That's probably other people have other ideas, but that's kind of where I try to start.
In some of my experience, someone like the developer would make a map of the process of the lawyer or the legal expert or whoever it is that's running the system, that says, just tell me from the start what happens. You get an email, you get a call, what do you do next, right? Do you put it on a piece of paper? Do you file it in a folder? Do you, archive that email? Do you give it a tag or a label? Just what do you do? Low tech, high tech, whatever it is. And that it takes a lot of work, but that kind of mapping can tell you a lot about what the needs really are. I mean, it may reveal that docassemble is not the solution, right? Or that technology is not the solution. But it can reveal a lot about the needs. I also think this question makes me think that it would be interesting to start collecting an idea of process, right? What are things that people forget to ask? What are things that end up being blockers? Can we make a onboarding interview that catches these cases? I haven't heard of one, but it sounds interesting to me. So.
Just looking through the chat, a lot of nice comments echoing what folks are saying. I think one suggestion from Richard Copley, who I think just has had to leave already, is maybe we need to follow the model of other teams where you have subject matter experts and coders and bring in more analysts and designers to do that communication, which is, I think, a really interesting point. I don't know. I've personally felt a lot of conflicting emotions about this idea of lawyer exceptionalism. Lots of lawyers feel we're unique, that we're special snowflakes in terms of how almost every area of life functions. Anything that's being built, we think a lawyer has to build it. But I think actually these guided interviews are kind of like we're taking legal knowledge and we're just representing it, right? They're different from other kinds of apps where the role of the subject matter expert could be more consultative at the beginning and the end. I think you're really talking about how do we take this legal knowledge and put it on paper. And that happens to be like a complicated flowchart a computer is executing for you. But I think there's a little bit to the idea that lawyers and legal knowledge representation is different from other kinds of subject areas that people could work with designers and coders to implement. Once you get beyond the really simple things, anyway.
Well, are we going to say something?
No.
One of the questions that came in that I missed was, could both Jonathans share more about their hopes of how people would start more companies like Upsolve? Do you have any answer to that, Jonathan?
Oh, wow. I think there's so many legal problems that affect consumers that they will never be served by the private bar, and will never be served by legal aid because, and so as a result, like building legal products is the only way to meet that gap. There's definitely challenges to distributing these products. Like once you build one or two, you figure out how to replicate it and make incremental improvements. But really, the billion-dollar access to justice question is how do you distribute it, these apps, to get it to people who need them, when they need them. And that is something that I think
Can we repeat some of that because the folks on Zoom couldn't quite hear?
Oh,
The closed captioning seems to get it up. So I take that as an indication that people could hear that. Am I correct?
Not everybody could, no.
Nope, I see I can't hear on there. Never mind.
sorry.
You want to come up to
Yeah, I want to
summarize?
I'll do
The Cliff Notes version is, I think we need thousands more of these products for legal services where people can't afford to pay lawyers $300 an hour, and there will never be enough legal aid lawyers. And so the need is there. The question that we need to solve as a community is we can build this product, but how do we distribute it to all the people who need it? And that's really the billion-dollar question for closing the access to justice gap with tech. You know, I think during this conference, we talked about community partnerships, and those are valuable, definitely, but not necessarily really scalable, because they're very relationship based, and relationships always need to be preserved and maintained. And each community partner may not necessarily have a huge amount of volume in terms of clients who have these unique problems. So then, you know, we also talked about SEO, and I think that's really important. I think nonprofits in particular have special advantages in appearing at the top of Google search if they know what they're doing in the legal space. But that's just the start. So I think that the real challenge is, you know, how do you get these products in the hands of people who need them?
What do you think, Jonathan, about some of the challenges with bankruptcy? Obviously, you have one forum that you're trying to work in. Do you think we can scale some of these problems? Like eviction potentially could be different in every county in the country. How do you think people should try to tackle those kind of issues?
I don't know. I think, you know, Matt was talking yesterday about Ileo building e-filing capacity in Illinois, and I think 100+ counties. And my head just sort of like exploded, like thinking how hard that is. And so eviction it's not an area that I've really done a lot of research into. But I think the challenge is enormous in that context. But again, I don't know anything about it, so I think hopefully other folks are looking into that.
Well, some people are turned off by the fact that there are so many jurisdictions and they each have their own rules, but Upsolve was not turned away by the fact that there are like as many jurisdictions as there are bankruptcy districts. And so they were able to write code that adapted to each bankruptcy district and each state and their exemptions and things like that. So we couldn't going for like states are one thing, 50 states is one thing. How many counties do we have in the United States? You know, that could get
fly by 150.
Now there are tools and that's why I love that docassemble is open source. There are tools for like writing classes and subclasses. So you could do one class for the state, another class for the county, subclasses, and adapt to those variations in a smart, maintainable way. You don't necessarily have to tackle every single county in the whole United States. You could go for LA and Chicago and just grow from there. But if you have a good code base, like I think it is possible to adapt to jurisdictions and you know, limit the ones you're available in. So I hope people are encouraged to build upsolves that do that. Let's see. I think there was one question here.
Yeah, I'm wondering how you.
Oh.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm wondering how you respond to questions or concerns about information security using open source software or materials like docassemble, and like responding to those questions or concerns in like plain language or to somebody without a knowledge base about it, because I think this is something that's important.
I think it's important to write a security policy or privacy policy and write it in plain language and tell your users what you're doing with their data. And the nice thing about docassemble is that you kind of know what it's doing and you know what features you're using. So, you know, by default, the user's answers are encrypted and the site administrator couldn't access them if they wanted to. However, that's not currently true for files. I need to implement encryption of files. But then you might be storing the information on a certain like rotation schedule, or you might be saving some of it, like the metadata about zip code. So you should disclose that you're capturing the zip code. I don't think anybody should think that open source makes it any different than any other company. The other companies are all taking your data and then mining it and doing all sorts of stuff with it. But hopefully you aren't doing all that, and you're only keeping what you absolutely need But then you can sort of explain that in your privacy policy. I think that's really the only way I know.
And maybe Chat GPT can help make it plain language.
Don't look at their privacy policy.
It's just your terms of use, I guess you're probably okay.
This is for Quentin. A couple of years ago, you ran boot camps for assembly line and some of the things that you're creating at the Lit Lab and GBLS before that. Do you have any plans on updating or offering a new boot camp for Kiln, Weaver, et cetera, or Form Builder, the form fixer, et cetera, that we learned yesterday? And then dovetailing into that is, what are my options to learn how to use Weaver inside and out? YouTube videos, et cetera. Like, well, what are my options?
Great question. So we tried to really document everything. So that's the first place to start, is the written documentation. I know that's not the best way for everybody to learn. We probably won't offer a boot camp like that again, but what we have been doing is for really it's just nonprofit partners in different states, we've been doing regular meetings, and that kind of grew out of the boot camp. We started with getting a bunch of people to know about the idea, and then we currently at least have funding at Suffolk to offer those partners to keep the work going. And that's kind of the nice thing about those is someone asks a question. If the first time, usually we write some documentation that week to answer it, so we don't have to answer it again. Even though we encourage people and make it clear it's okay if you ask it again. Like, we can be your live search engine, but we want to make sure we have a place to point people to, which concisely answers it. So that documentation will at least continue to get better and to grow. Yeah, training, docassemble training is a great idea. I know that there's A2J Tech Store. They tried to do some things on Udemy, and I think that got some traction. Sometimes as a consultant, I've done some live trainings. Mia and Sam, who are going to be doing the beginner training in about 20 minutes, helped do one for a German law firm. So that's something that I think makes sense. I don't know that the lab will offer something like that again too soon, but there's David. You could ask our director and see what he thinks.
We do have Microsoft's Teams group where all those groups sort of come together. So get me your contact info and we can easily put you on that, and then we can point you to things from there. That goes for everyone online as well, if you're interested.
And one additional thing about it is, I just discovered days ago your deep dive coding hours. I find value in that. It's sometimes out of a 2-hour session, it might only be, say, 10 or 15 minutes that's relevant to what I'm looking for. But the more that you can put on video, people like me anyway, I don't know how many of us are out there, find value in just videos.
People who view that, I think that's great. I know we started. This is great. So this is not everyone knows probably, but at Suffolk, this project, assembly line project, we started with coordinating with people around the world. So we put all of our meetings on YouTube, and we've kept that for some of them. And the coding, every Monday we do a meeting among the three of us usually here, Bryce, Michelle, and myself, where we're going through whatever the topic of the week is for coding, and we record those. Sometimes it's more stand-up like, but you're right, sometimes we do try to solve problems live. You can find those if you would like. They're on our YouTube playlist for the Suffolk.
I just think it's great that you watch them. This is exciting.
Yeah.
It validates. It validates.
I've seen hours of you guys. You guys are more than on my TV.
At our best and our worst, I'm sure.
We have like 420 something 2-hour long videos on the YouTube channel, so watch away.
A lot of them are going over issues in GitHub, so.
You can sometimes see the discussions there on GitHub of the same thing we talked about. That's true. Searchable that way.
Well, online, Emily asked, does the panel have any recommendations for change management? For example, we're often told of times when associates and staff want to upgrade systems, but a law firm owner is resistant.
I don't. I wish I had an answer to that, but I don't. Luckily, I don't have to. My past job, I did IT work for Greater Boston Legal Services, and I'm glad I don't have to convince a bunch of lawyers to adopt new technology anymore.
Yeah, I think you need to put a lot of effort into it and then take the amount of effort you've put into it and multiply it by 10. You know, like I think of the way that change management happens nationally in the legal aid space. It happens by you going to a conference and giving the same presentation every year for like 10 years. And now that will have an effect, and that's a very good thing to do. And that kind of thing like will change the culture. So I think it's all about communication, but also just, you know, being able to demonstrate things that are valuable to people. You know, like if you're trying to make change within a firm, you know, automate something for them with docassemble and roll it out. And if people use it, then they'll start to see the value, and then they'll be more likely to accept the change that you are proposing.
I think even a paper prototype, it's sometimes called, is really useful, where you make like a PowerPoint presentation of how it would work. So you don't spend all the time coding or testing or whatever it is. You make a PowerPoint presentation where it looks like you click on a button and things happen. And it becomes real for people in a way that it didn't before. I think for some people, examples of other places where it has been successful might be compelling. And I think, and first, let me say I have very limited experience in this, you know, just 1 or 2 situations, but what I've heard others talking about is really knowing the system that you're trying to change before introducing change. So even if you know, a technologist and you come in and you think this is a great idea, right? You don't actually know what's been holding people back. If it's just one person who is, you know, overwhelmed by whatever they already have to do and it's just too much to put another thing on their plate, or if there are actual barriers, or if there are specific concerns people have that they haven't voiced, and that if they did, we could tell them they weren't an issue, right? But there just hasn't been that exploration done. These are things I've heard about in other conferences I've attended, and I've had a little bit of luck with that, with some experience of my own, but.
Yeah, and it sounds like Nicole Sino kind of has that role, who spoke yesterday at the conference. So that's someone to look up if you can find her information from the bio.
I have one burning question, if the panel has time. I was wondering, were you trained in school to have like the expertise that you have? Because everybody on this panel is, I guess, is a sort of high functioning docassemble developer. Did you learn it in school, or did you learn it after your schooling? And so I guess my question is, describe like what education you had in both technology and like the subject matter that you work with. We start with Bryce.
I can start. So I did do like my undergraduate degree in computer science. However, I like really focused on like robotics and like a whole bunch of stuff that I have not used in like 3 years. And so I'd say a lot of the stuff that I have done with docassemble, like I mentioned earlier in my presentation, I could not name or know anything about like any of the technologies on those slides. I remember at my previous robotics job, some people had tried to bring in Docker, and I was really skeptical, and I was like, what is this? Why would you do any of this? This is just an extra layer and makes it really complicated and stuff. And so like, I'd say all of my the stuff that I've learned and have like been able to actually use on this project and with docassemble has come a lot from just reading and like sort of self-taught stuff. Like I've done a lot of shout out to the Mozilla developer documentation online. They're great for anything like web, all of the HTML and CSS and JavaScript stuff that I know, I have learned from that. And then just honestly going through and doing little, like sort of making your own tutorials. So like if you go in through and you read a tutorial site, you'll kind of get it, but it's never really enough. And you sort of have to like essentially write your own tutorial. And so you have to play around enough with the technology to figure it out. And that's sort of how I did Docker. Was I was like, okay, let me spin up a Docker container. What can I do with it? How do I actually like get in and run things with it? Do I have to start it off running things with it? And like all of these different questions, and sort of eventually playing around with it, I was like, oh, at some point it just sort of clicked and I got it, and you can sort of run with it from there. And the other set of tools that I did, that I do have, and I sort of got from, I had a few internships with Google, which really opened my eyes to just sort of like how to treat software development as a profession, and at like how to make sure all of your stuff is like sort of your code is neat, you're well documented, all of your PRs are like well described, and that's sort of like just a thing that I had to sort of get ingrained into you, because you can't really make any changes at Google without someone going in and reviewing, and here are 50 different comments you have to address before anything can go in the code base. And so sort of just I think those I'd say are like, it's a combination of treating software like a profession and sort of just keeping everything clean and as detailed as you can, and then a whole lot of playing around and trying to teach yourself stuff.
So I did not study programming at college. My main focus was blacksmithing. So that was a change. It became, for reasons of life, it became out of reach at one point. And I was kind of stuck at home, and I started getting really bored. And I started trying to learn to program. And then I threw my computer down because it was impossible to learn to program. So I did that a few times, more than a few times, and then found a community. It was just kind of one of the online communities I was involved with. That helped me get over that initial hump. And I think community can be a big part of learning for some people. It, turbocharged me over, through a lot of challenges, to a point where I could start exploring by myself. For me, the documentation was completely unreadable when I started. That I tried to start going at it through the documentation, and that's where I just hit dead end after dead end. And what I found I needed to do was do things that I couldn't do, and find out that they were actually impossible, but learn along the way. I'd get an idea, I'd go at it for 3 to 6 months, find out it was absolutely, I'm trying to solve the halting problem, and that's not a
Famously
thing.
unsolvable computer science problem, by the way. Logically impossible.
It's just, there's nothing you can do. But I had to try. So, and I didn't know it was the halting problem when I started. So, nor what the halting problem was. So, I learned along that way. And then I think it's just mostly been influenced, though, by the communities that I've become part of. And that's what's led me in various directions. Yeah.
So I had some formal computer science education as an undergraduate. It does not teach you, just like Bryce, like you were saying, like obviously, well, it was like 15 years earlier for me that I did those classes than for you, but it was not good then either, in terms of teaching you the basics that you need to be a productive developer on a team. There was no, like, software engineering wasn't really part of it. It was formal things like the halting problem, designing an operating system that I'm not using today. But what I did learn by doing, and I just threw myself into books and documentation that was available online. I started out doing web development in PHP in college, and that was where I learned the most. This was like, being at Suffolk, is probably like one of the times I did more of the team development, and Git was not a thing when I was in college either. So that idea of pull requests kind of, people used to email in their, I guess they still maybe do for Linux, they email in their diffs. That was the way people did at scale software development on teams. Git is way better. And it's kind of cool to learn that as now there's a few years of maturity there, to be able to read best practices and then apply it in the real world to a team here. But a lot of it's just,
Talking
you have
more
to do it on
about
the job.
GitHub or Git.
Git did not exist until when I was in college. No, it did not exist. Yeah, I guess I'm just saying old. It's not really that old, actually.
It's not. I just couldn't imagine living without it anymore.
We used to use something called Subversion, which was terrible.
And that's shut down now, so. But yes, I refused to use Git for the first several years of programming. Only saved stuff in folders, copy, duplicate the folder. I got there, and now can't let it go.
I think the key is like all of the best learning, it sounds like everybody up here did, was in the real world. But you can get a foundation from different areas, but you need to be on a team, try it out for real.
And as far as legal education, you and I went to law school, but you two did not, right?
Absolutely not.
I avoided law school specifically. I made it very clear.
Yeah, you just both like to hang around.
Yeah. Our runner, I love it.
I have two questions. First, I want Jonathan, if you could tell us your journey to coding mastery. But then I also had a question about formatting text within PDF fields and how, what's the best approach to try to enhance some of those capabilities? I know Suffolk has done some stuff with overflow fields like that, but there's even more advanced features like just changing vertical alignment or doing more additional overflows and things like that, so it could use forms that are pre-built instead of having to do reconfiguration.
So my journey was that I hacked away on computers when I was a teenager, and then went off to college and law school, and I didn't take any CS classes because I didn't think I was going to do anything with computers. But then I got off to work in law firms, and I was so appalled by how inefficient they were. I thought, some of this stuff could probably be automated. So I used my tech skills to teach myself more about programming. And it sort of turned into a part-time job. And now I spend about half my time coding. I do a lot of automation stuff in legal aid. As far as formatting text in PDF forms, I'm not aware of any features for that other than manipulating your form beforehand in Adobe Acrobat Pro and making sure the font is correct and the alignment is correct. There's a fair amount that you can do with forms.
There is like a RTF-like capability to format a field, but I don't know if you can manipulate it with any open source tools.
Yeah, there's this.
If you've dived into the Pike PDF, do they have any functionality there? It might be part of their, what is the annotation that appearances stream, but we really can't do much with Pike PDF.
No, yeah. So PDF is weird because, for the exact reason that Quentin mentioned, there aren't a lot of open source tools that you can use to edit it for like a lot of somewhat technical reasons. Given it's just really hard to edit, like every time if you add one specific character, you have to change a whole bunch of other numbers in the file because you've just moved everything in the file by one. And PDF likes to reference exact spots in the file. And so for that reason, that's why there's like one or maybe two PDF editors out there. And also for another technical reason, PDFs are really, like, when you get all the way down to the bottom, it's just a series of commands that says, put an A here, put a B here, like turn this C, or like turn your cursor this way and put a C here. It's like, and so you have to go through every single one of those commands to actually edit anything. And the PDF spec is like 500 pages long. And so all that to say, it's it's really hard. And like Quentin said, I think that there's the best thing to look into, and that's something that we'll probably at Suffolk we'll probably do, is start looking into like a rich text formatting, which is I'd say somewhere between a plain text file and like a docx file.
Make things bold and italics. And,
yes, yeah, you can do simple formatting like that. And PDF can handle that, but I think it's its own specific type of rich text. And again, there aren't like a ton of all the open source tools there are. They'll give you all this raw data and you have to handle it yourself. And so there's a lot of complexity there as well.
I think something that I think maybe is a good description of the PDF format is if like someone took Carl Sagan's instruction literally for the recipe for an apple pie. So if you don't know, it's in order to create an apple pie, you must first create the universe. Every PDF file starts with the universe creation stage to get you to the recipe for the apple pie.
I think final question goes to Jonathan.
Okay, just hold up.
We do have one in the chat, which we can.
I have a question too.
Thanks, David. So this is for the non-lawyer engineer members of the panel. So in my experience, it can be really hard to get engineers, tech people interested in the law because problems like bankruptcy or debt collection are like very niche. So I'm curious, like, what was it that attracted you guys to devoting your talent to this work?
Okay, I will say, my end of things. Honestly, it's the social good I see in this space. For a long time in my life, I was not able to have an impact beyond my little circle, my living room, right? I wasn't really able to reach out into the world. And when I started being able to do that, I wanted to change something, right? And I saw these things that I wanted to change, and I didn't know how to change them. And then I found out I could volunteer to code, right? Which blew my mind. And that's kind of been it since then. The motivation is the purpose of the work. And then, the sugar on top is that I get to code while I'm doing it, right? That's been my motivation there.
Yeah. I'd say my motivation is about the same, honestly, of like a lot of the social good stuff. Like I was at my old robotics job. It was interesting, and it's like robotics has very interesting problems. But it's not necessarily like a thing that if I took a step back, it's like, oh, is this actually helping people in the world? Maybe if you want to look at the economics and, oh, we're making things cheaper for people, which is just really not super convincing to me personally. And so I don't remember where, like, I don't remember like if there was a specific turning point that I saw it, but I know one specific book that a textbook, I like to read textbooks, that I read that was super interesting was Data Feminism, which is a data science book, but it's through like a feminist lens. And so it sort of deconstructs a lot of what I thought was going to be like, oh, here's how you can use data to like help like underserved populations. And it was, no, here's how you can take data and then knit an entire data visualization and like do things with your hands. And there was a lot of good deconstructions in there that made me question a lot about like what I was doing at my old job and stuff. And at least that was sort of one specific turning point that I like read that book and I was like, wow, I need to sort of just rethink exactly how I approach my career and like what sort of effect I want to have on the world. So.
And the fact that docassemble is open source was a huge factor for me personally.
You should both say that you're also both found out about this through Code for Boston. So I don't know if Code for America is a place you've tried to find. It's easier to grasp civic tech, I think, for a lot of people, and then legal tech for good is a niche that you can bridge that. I don't know if that's the place you've tried to recruit.
Yeah, that's where I met Quentin. He dragged me over.
That's right. That's right.
All right. Well, we have the beginner training starting in 2 minutes, so we got to leave the stage. But thanks very much for all your questions.